complete the economic and monetary union. We must create a banking union and a fiscal union and the corresponding institutional and political mechanisms. Today, the Commission is presenting legislative proposals for a single European supervisory mechanism for the Eurozone. This is the stepping stone to the banking union.
Danke, Herr Samaras. Das Wort hat jetzt für die Kommission Herr Präsident Barroso.
Mr. President, Prime Minister, honourable members. First of all, let me very sincerely congratulate you, Prime Minister, for your very inspiring words. Listening to you, I thought that not only Europe owes a lot to ancient and classic Greece. Without Greece, European civilization would simply not exist as such, but also that I'm sure we are going to owe a lot to you, to modern Greece, for the great example of courage, determination and commitment to our Europe that you personally and the people of Greece are giving these days. It is, I believe, a fitting coincidence that we end this parliamentary term under the presidency of Greece, a country that has been the focus of so much political energy and public attention during this mandate, and that in the end has emboldened us to do all we can to fight both the root causes and the social consequences of the crisis. Let us not forget that some people, not so long ago, were predicting that Greece would exit the euro, that Greece could even leave the European Union. In the more apocalyptic scenario, some people were even predicting the implosion of the euro, eventually the disintegration of the European Union. The fact that today Prime Minister of Greece is here, with his strong European commitment, proud of the commitment of his country to Europe.
Well, had there been a proper question there, I might try to answer it. Euroscepticism is growing right across the European Union. Nobody here, not even the maniacs that believe in the project, would question that. It's coming in all shapes and forms. It's on the right, it's in the centre, and it's on the left. And the reason, of course, and you come from Ireland, so you should know better than anybody, the reason, of course, is that actually no one's ever given consent for a political European Union. The French clearly, followed by the Dutch, rejected the Constitution, and they rebranded it as the Lisbon Treaty, and only one country had a referendum on that. That was Ireland, and the people of Ireland rejected it. So you can't tell me there is popular support for a United States of Europe. Mrs Redding may believe it, Mr Barroso may believe it, one or two in the front row may believe it, but the peoples of Europe don't believe it.
Das Wort hat jetzt für die fraktionslosen Abgeordneten Herr Brons. Vielen Dank, Frau Zimmer. Das Wort hat für die EFD-Fraktion Herr Farage.
Thank you. Well, even by the standards of this place, today's atmosphere has been leaden. You know, a great global political leader, Mr Barroso, comes along, and out of 750 members, 44 people turn up to listen. Why is that? Well, I've noticed something. I've been here 15 years, but in the last 5 years, something really big has changed. The European dream is crumbling, absolutely crumbling. There are a few maniacs in the front row here and in your Commission who, of course, still want a United States of Europe, but actually out there in the Member States they don't, and most of the MEPs here, yeah, they want a job, yes, they want to get re-elected, but the enthusiasm for this project is dying. Why? Well, you've made two big mistakes. The first mistake was, of course, to extend the Eurozone. It would have been OK had it been just Germany and a few northern European countries, but to bring the Mediterranean in to the Eurozone has been a disaster. And the second mistake was to allow the free movement of peoples to southern and to eastern Europe. You know, we in the United Kingdom, who've been the most open country with regards to immigration of any European country through a history that has lasted hundreds of years, now have 4,000 migrants a week that come to Britain from the European Union and stay for a year or more. And these are the two realities that have hit home to people. The EU doesn't work economically, and open-door migration is fundamentally changing societies in ways that people don't want. And to listen to the economics. Mr Barroso, you talked today about the possibility of an industrial renaissance in Europe, which sounded good. Lighter touch regulation, all very encouraging, and then you say, but we must pursue our climate change carbon targets. The Americans have gone for shale gas and reduced energy prices. The Chinese are digging up coal in quantities we can't fathom and building just their 2 coal-fired power stations every week. This policy of economic unilateralism on climate change, that's what's destroying jobs in Europe, and the electors are going to have a chance in 72 days' time to give their verdict. I suspect the next European Parliament will be very much more exciting than this one's been this morning.
Das Wort hat jetzt für die fraktionslosen Achso, Entschuldigung. Ich habe eine Blue Card von Frau Sinclair, bitte. Frau Sinclair, bitte. Frau Sinclair, geht Ihre Frage an wen geht Ihre Frage, bitte?
Mr.
Herrn Farage?
That problem that still distresses our governments. They have led to an alarming increase in employment, especially amongst young people. And they are still holding back our households and our companies. But Europe has fought back. In those 5 years, we have given a determined response. We suffered the crisis together. We realized we had to fight it together. And we did, and we are doing it. If we look back and think about what we have done together throughout the crisis, I think it's fair to say that we would never have thought all of this possible 5 years ago. We are fundamentally reforming the financial sector so that people's savings are safe. We have improved the way governments work together, how they return to sound public finances and modernize their economies. We have mobilized over €700 billion to pull crisis-struck countries back from the brink, the biggest effort ever in stabilization between countries. I still vividly remember my meeting last year with chief economists of many of our leading banks. Most of them were expecting Greece to leave the euro. All of them feared the disintegration of the euro area. Now, we can give a clear reply to those fears. No one has left or has been forced to leave the euro. This year, the European Union enlarged from 27 to 28 member states, and next year, the euro area will grow from 17 to 18 member states. What matters now is what we make of this progress. Do we talk it up or talk it down? Do we draw confidence from it to pursue what we have started, or do we belittle the results of our efforts?
Farage.
Mr. Farage has the floor.
Years ago, Mrs. Thatcher recognised the truth behind the European project. She saw that it was about taking away democracy from nation states and handing that power to largely unaccountable people. Knowing as she did that the euro would not work, she saw that this was a very dangerous design. Now, we in UKIP take that same view, and I have tried over the years in this Parliament to predict what the next moves would be as the euro disaster unfolded. But not even me in my most pessimistic of speeches would have imagined, Mr Rehn, that you and the others in the Troika would resort to the level of common criminals and steal money from people's bank accounts in order to keep propped up this total failure that is the euro. You even tried to take money away from the small investors in direct breach of the promise you made back in 2008. Well, the precedent has been set. And if we look at countries like Spain, where business bankruptcies are up 45% year on year, we can see what your plan is to deal with the other bailouts as they come. I must say, the message this sends out to investors is very loud and clear. Get your money out of the Eurozone before they come for you. What you have done in Cyprus is you have actually sounded the death knell of the euro. Nobody in the international community will have confidence in leaving their money there. And how ironic to see the Russian Prime Minister, Dmitry Medvedev, compare your actions and say, I can only compare it to some of the decisions taken by the Soviet authorities. And then we have a new German proposal that says that actually what we ought to do is confiscate some of the value of people's properties in the southern Mediterranean Eurozone states. This European Union is the new communism. It is power without limits. It is creating a tide of human misery, and the sooner it is swept away, the better. And what of this place? What of the Parliament? This Parliament has the ability to hold the Commission to account. I have put down a motion of censure debate on the table. I wonder whether any of you have the courage to recognise it and to support it. I very much doubt that, and I'm minded that there's a new Mrs Thatcher in Europe, and he's called Fritz Bolkestein, and he has said of this Parliament, remember he's a former commissioner, it is not representative anymore. For the Dutch or European citizen, the European Parliament is living out a federal fantasy which is no longer sustainable. How right he is.
Not only unpopular with the main European powers, but they also came into a clash with the end of the Cold War, because at the point which should have been the greatest thing for Margaret Thatcher, many European countries are doing extremely badly out of it. So to come back to the question that I ask, it now starts to look as if Margaret Thatcher was prescient on at least some of the points that she made. She said very strongly at the time that the French theory of binding down Germany by creating a single currency was the reverse of the case. She said what would happen is, look, Germany is the country that's best with the money. Its money is the strongest. If you create a euro, as it was not then called, far from diminishing Germany, you will Germanize the zone in which the euro operates. Germany will be the master of Europe, and that's not a good idea. And I think it's undeniable that in the Eurozone that is what has happened. I wouldn't agree with Mrs Thatcher's attribution of bad motive to Germany about that. I think that's quite false, but I think that is actually the real result. And she also said that, of course, she raised this not only a political problem, it's an economic question. Nobody has answered the basic point which she raised again and again about the problem of trying to have a currency in which one size fits all when it doesn't. So if you're living in a country like Greece now, because you're not allowed to devalue, you are impoverishing yourself and your people are in really desperate situation. And actually, I think it's quite surprising that there hasn't been even more unrest and violence when you have more than a quarter of the population unemployed. So it's a very serious question. And not to mention the competitive sclerosis that comes into the Eurozone at present, where it's getting left behind in global markets. And of course, the issue that's never gone away of sovereignty and who does decide all these issues and who's entitled to, and what is the democratic answerability when the European Central Bank can effectively, or European institutions can effectively decide who's going to be the emergency Prime Minister of Italy or Greece or whatever. And the point, which is something Mrs Thatcher was always good on, is that money is serious. You can have a lot of rhetoric about European integration, and indeed you can have a lot of European integration if it's institutional and if the shoe doesn't pinch. But if you actually create a currency, then the sort of truth will out. That you will find out what's really happening, and you may not like it. And that, I think, is what's happening. So I think what I would argue, and I think what people are sort of realising in Britain, and possibly more widely, is that all those awkward and unpopular questions that Mrs Thatcher raised in 1988, 89 and 90 have not been satisfactorily answered. And they remain the right questions, which we do still need to answer. And therefore, what she was shouting about 25 years ago is actually just as relevant now as it was then, and people are more ready to listen to it now than they were then. Thanks very much.
We're trying to make the practice of subsidiarity more effective, for example, by getting the Commission to agree to a longer time limits for submitting reasoned opinions, and to withdrawing and rethinking any proposal which attracts the yellow card of 1/3 of the parliamentary chambers of the member states. It does not mean that we should eschew making special arrangements for the UK in a piece of new legislation coming forward, if that can be justified by evidence, not just by ideological assertion. But we should be cautious indeed about heading down any road that requires treaty change for it to be implemented. And we should stop tilting at windmills, such as the treaty's preambular reference to an ever closer union. For one thing, and I notice that most people who wax indignant about this phrase haven't taken the trouble to read the treaty before they did so. For one thing, what it calls for in the preamble to the original treaty was an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe, not their governments. For another, it has never been and could never be a legal base for decision-making. That is not what preambles are for. Now, you will gather from this that I am less than convinced of the case for holding an in-out referendum at a fixed date in the future, which owes more to the vagaries and pressures of Britain's own electoral timetable than it does to any wider European perspectives. Britain's membership of the EU, I would suggest, is too important a matter to play Russian roulette with in that way. But irrespective of what I, as an individual independent backbencher, might think, there surely is a compelling case for improving the quantity and the quality of the British debate about Europe. And there must too be a case for the public debate in Britain to escape from the hyperbole of the tabloid press, quite often outright lies, and to address those important issues in a measured and responsible manner. And this week's debate between Nick Clegg and Nigel Farage was perhaps a first step in that direction. Only then will Britain's continued membership be properly rooted, and will we avoid that sleepwalking towards the exit of which some have warned. Thank you very much.